People oftentimes say it's good in place where we are not. This is plain absurd. We must pray to God that we were absent here and there, and that's why. An interesting survey was once conducted, and here are the results, and we are just on the trail. Welcome to Flip Side of History. Today we'll discuss specifically 5 horrible periods in our human history where you would more than definitely not want to be in. Let us continue this episode. Rome from Tiberius to Nero. In this huge city, if you accidentally caught the eye of Tiberius, Caligula, the bloody henchmen of Claudius, and Nero, you could simply lose your life. Looked the wrong way, dressed the wrong way, forgot to greet properly, the reason could be a beauty of someone. Tiberius and Caligula sometimes ordered the murder of handsome men for the sole reason that they are handsome, obviously out of envy, in gusts of bad mood at the sight of one's falling hair and growing belly. In principle, Octavian, who deified himself, was not a gift. He even gouged out someone's eye. But in comparison with his successors, Augustus is innocent, so to speak. And more, a group of unfamiliar passers-by could have been pushed into the arena by some armed workers of the Colosseum. Christians often ran out, they were brutally killed and persecuted, and some had to be fed to lions. After all, the plebeians demanded spectacles. Contemporaries of those years note that at that time in almost every garbage dump one could find human parts of body. And we are talking about innocent outsiders, but those who were in any way connected with the maintenance of the palaces and country villas of these depraved princeps, as well as the mansions of numerous relatives and associates of crazy dictators, risked much more. Especially if you're a slave, but in that outstanding era, even royal powers or nobles would not have saved us. Senatorship and high curia in the executive branch, not a single thing would be done. The paranoia of Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero spared literally no one. Of course, it was worse for those who still joined some kind of opposition, the idea of which was revealed in time. But how to protect yourself by doing absolutely everything in the name of one of these rulers of the Roman Empire? But they did not spare even such people. Horrific times were reigning on our planet at the time in vast empire. Europe during the 14th century. At that time, the continent, especially the western half of it, was hit by the most terrible plague in terms of the scale of human losses. It is said that the Spanish flu in 1918 claimed many more lives. But this is a wrong statement, since the final statistics on the Spanish flu are known, and the mass graves of those who died from the plague during 14th century can still be found. Paris literally stands on bones. The tunnels are crammed with fragments of skeletons. The bones are lined up separately. The skulls are separate. What is under the capital of France is just a grain of sand. Western Europe was dying and infecting others by the hundreds a day. In the Central and Southeast Europe, things were better, but there was still nothing to be happy about. It was exactly in that terrible century that the first gas masks and biosecurity suits were developed. In the first version, these were beak masks with eyes made of glass, smoothly turning into a robe up to the toes. Infected corpses were buried, if there was still a place, or burned away from the city walls and from the reservoirs that fed the water supply. By the way, let's talk about the situation with water. Part of the contagion did come with it. Since then, people in Europe have stopped bathing. This was done only one time a week, and even then only wealthy persons. If more often, then only on the prescription of a doctor. More often they used rub-downs with all sorts of acids, noticing in the years of plague that vinegar protects a person well from infection. Although oddly enough, it was during the 14th century that there was an insignificant breakthrough in pharmacy and general therapy of various sorts. First eyewear and even the first microscope were invented, because it was urgently needed by society. Western Europe from the 15th to the 17th centuries, overall. The dominance of the Catholic Inquisition. How much do we actually know about this historical period? Why do we think there were practically no attractive women left in Germany and other countries in north of Europe before the arrival of Arabs and other immigrants from the Middle and Western East, Turks and Azerbaijanis, already in the 19th century? They were simply burned. Auto da fe has existed since the appearance of the first heretics in the 10th century. But the Inquisition itself as a fully established confessional judicial institution that made burning a mass phenomenon spread only from the 15th century. Let's also add that it was from the Iberian Peninsula. It set itself the goal of ridding the world of secret Jews, secret Christian sectarians, and secret Gnostics. In principle, since the 10th century, it has been pretty clear to many that Christianity of the Western practice, which 100 years later received the framework of a separate religion, is the most aggressive around the world. The Crusades, which by the way affected not so much Muslims and Jews as Christians of Greek and Apostolic rites, were an invention of the popes and not anyone else. They also loudly blessed them, seriously misleading thousands of those who fell into the trap of popes rather than keeping the faith inside, among whom there were even children, and they went on the crusade. The Inquisition was the second project of the Catholic popes, as it turned out no less disastrous, judging by the thousands of killings. Thousands of burned people. As the records of such strange courts show, it was often not laden adherents of Judaism, Gnostic cults, heretical denominations, alchemists, or witches who were tortured and burned. It's oftentimes were way too rich or too beautiful. When it comes to Inquisition with first group, everything is clear. According to the law, the property passed to informers. People were tortured into confessing to all of the above. As for the second ones, the fact is that a beautiful woman in a small town could ruin marriages by her, well, very existence. The Inquisition became only a long-awaited tool for settling scores for faded or middle-aged ladies. So you would lose your life in this era because of your beauty, if you're a woman, because of your wealth, or because of your desire to study the properties of medical plants and minerals, if you're a man. They aspersed everyone. It should not be forgotten that the middle of this period was the intensity of the war between Protestants and Catholics. For the record, the Church of Rome considered official Protestantism to be sectarianism. On the main territory of the former Russian Empire during the Civil War. On one occasion in 1920, a peasant driving a cart through a village in Russia was asked, "Are you for the Reds or for the Whites?" Literally sides which fought. In order to be on the safe side and not get into any trouble, he said that so far neither for the one nor for the other. But he was stabbed anyway. The man should have said for the black side. The attackers turned out to be anarchists, yet another group out of many. It turns out that he was killed only for the wrong opinion and thoughts. The poor guy had nothing else in his carriage except some fruits and vegetables. Thus, he was driving at the wrong time and in the wrong place. Were there any safe parts of the country in those days? Let us explain it. The state fell apart into some temporary political bodies, the power of which was seized by the military of different political persuasions. The Bolsheviks, they were the ones who seized. The Mensheviks and Socialist Revolutionaries, the latter two were given the power of the Soviets, not the Bolsheviks. The monarchists, who still believed in the only Tsar. The conservative Democrats, supporters of the restoration of the conditional government. The anarchists, who were also divided into anarchist syndicalists, anarchist communists like Nestor Makhno, or anarchists in the classical sense, professing the type of wisdom such as man as a wolf to a man, or every man for himself. And if you don't fit in the paradigm of an armed man, you'll get a bullet in the forehead. Simple. A great excuse to take your belongings, kind of like fighting for an idea or thought. We obviously should voice this. In the Far East, in the Pacific Theater, in most of Europe, in the western part of the USSR, as well as in North Africa during Second World War. As you know, it was these regions that were affected by the greatest war of 20th century. At any moment you could die from a shell fragment, in an explosion, from a stray bullet, to be blown up by a mine, to be shot just for being a gypsy, a Jew, a communist, a partisan, or for being very similar to them. Then the new government, the Aryan race of the Third Reich, did not really take into account a lot of other people. But most people are frightened not so much by direct participation in military operations, in some of which an average of a bit more than 10,000 people could die on both sides per day, but by becoming an inmate of a concentration or filtration camp, German, Japanese, or Croatian camps. We are not going to describe on this channel what was done to people there. Our other channel is dedicated to this. We cover a lot of topics on ex-war history. We should never forget that in all of the listed locations of the planet, it was possible to die without being at the front line. When firing at a completely peaceful vessel on which you would cross a river or sea, fleeing war, accidentally hit by anti-ship mines, as well as banal hunger, which was very widespread. And people fell lifeless not only in besieged Leningrad, although there were more deaths than anywhere else, and no one will argue with this. There was nowhere to hide. The world was at war. Haven't you met a single Hitlerite? And who told you that you won't meet a single collaborator or just an armed looter, who, even if he robs you to the bone, will still kill you, no matter what, in order to avoid consequences? After all, majority of gangs did not want to be told about later. They wanted to act silently and use dreadful methods. Many of us believe that the most terrible time in Russia was the pre-war and post-war years of Stalin, repressions and all of that. In reality, this is far from the actual truth. You can leave a like and we'll cover the topic in much more detail. In fact, everyone should appreciate and love the time and the state in which they live, and love their neighbors. What a great time we live in, actually. Thank you for watching our episode. Subscribe to Flip Side of History and leave a like. Also, take a look at our other episodes. And for now, see you later.